Hello, welcome to PeopleSoft channel. My name is Siva Koya and this is my den. This is where I hide when I shoot my videos. Today I'm back with one more interesting episode. In this episode, I'll show you a cool way of uploading documents into PeopleSoft system using mobile devices. But first, let me quickly give you a glimpse of what we are going to accomplish by the end of this episode. We are going to create a PeopleSoft Fluid application from the scratch to allow employees to upload their address proof. Now I'm logging into PeopleSoft application using my iPhone. I will navigate to Employee Self-Service and click on the brand new tile that we created for address proof. Users can select what kind of address proof they plan to upload. I will select driver's license. To upload document, I will click on Add Attachment button. Here, as you can see, users have multiple options to upload their document. Either they can select the picture that's already available in their photo library, or take a brand new picture, or select the document from their files folder. In this case, I will tap on Take Photo. I'm going to take a picture now. I will take a picture. I will select Use Photo and I will click on Upload button. Now I will click Done. Finally, let's give some description. And it's time to click Submit button. User can see the confirmation message that his request was successfully submitted and finally a thank you message. Now you know what application you are going to create. Without wasting any more time, let's get started and build this application from the scratch. Welcome back guys. You would have noticed the runtime of this video is little longer than my usual ones. But I will make it easy for you. I can summarize the entire process in 3 easy steps. Step number 1, we will develop our Fluid application from the scratch in the app designer. You know the process. We will create fields, records, Fluid page, component and menu. While we are at it, we will include a special subpage on our transaction page delivered by Oracle for our Fluid attachment purpose. Step number 2, we will log into PeopleSoft online portal and define security for our Fluid attachment framework. In other words, through this configuration, we can control who can upload attachments, who can view them, and finally who can delete them. During the online configuration process, we will also define in which record our attachments should be stored. In our last and final step, we are going to tie back the online configuration that we did in step number 2 back to our transaction page using people code by leveraging application classes provided by Oracle. This is it guys, this is what we are going to do today. Before we move on, I have a quick question for you. Does this flow ring any bell to you? It does for me. Approval workflow framework, drop zones, and event mapping follow more or less a similar pattern. In all these frameworks, we create something in App Designer, then do some online configuration, and finally tie back our online configuration to our transaction page using people code. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. For now, let's jump into our app designer and start developing our Fluid application. Alright folks, I'm inside my app designer. I have created a couple of objects ahead of time to save us some time. Let's go through them one by one. I just created one custom field to take input from the user. User is either going to select driver's license or passport before they can upload their address proof. As you can see here, this is a translate field. This is the core transaction record that I'm going to use for our Fluid application. Since this is a self-service application, I used Empl ID as the key. Last update date time is used to track when was our transaction last updated. and last update offer ID, who updated our transaction. Using this field, we can track what kind of address proof user uploaded. In our case, users can either select passport or driver's license. That's what we defined in the translate values of this field. Thinking about the future, if the documents uploaded needs to be reviewed and approved using approval framework, we can use this field. Are you ready? It's time to get our hands dirty. Let's start creating our Fluid page. I will click on the new button and I will select Fluid page, click OK. Since ours is a simple application, I will go with the default layout, PSL apps content. I will choose this layout. Let's give a name to our Fluid page. Let's go ahead and save our page. I always prefer to say yes to this message just in case Oracle adds some people code behind the default layout. Let me drag a long edit box onto our page. We will use this long edit box to display instructions to our employees, showing them why we are asking for address proof. By the way, I forgot to mention I created a derived work record and inserted some fields that we plan to use on our page. I will use these three fields to name group boxes on our page so that we can conditionally display content on our Fluid page. Since Fluid pages will not come with a save button out of the box, I will use this field to trigger our save logic. Finally, I will use this field to display instructional content to our end user. Now, I will go ahead and assign this field to our long edit box. I will double click on our long edit box and assign our derived work record field. Let's make user instructions display only. In order to do that, I will navigate to use tab and check the box display only. I will click OK. Let's not display label for our instructions field. We can do that using CSS style. I will navigate to Fluid tab. To hide the label, I will use the CSS style PSC underscore label hyphen none. We are done here. Now I will insert radio buttons that users will select before they can upload their address proof. I will insert two radio buttons, one representing passport and other driver's license. Let me group these two fields using a group box. My plan is to hide this group box or these fields after user has successfully submitted his attachment. I do not want to show this group box to the end user. In order to do that, I will navigate to Fluid tab and make the group box layout only. In order to programmatically control this group box, I'm going to assign a record field for this group box. I will use one of the derived work record fields. I will select group box underscore one. I'll click OK. I will go ahead and save our page. On classic pages, we can enable save button on the page through configuration. We do not have that luxury with Fluid. We have to explicitly insert a save button. Let me insert a button on our page that user will push to submit his changes. Let's keep the destination as people code command and I will assign a field name to our submit button. Let's use the label standard text and let's keep it submit. Let's apply a style to highlight our submit button. I will use the style called PSA underscore primary. We are done here. I will click OK. Let me put a group box around our submit button in order to programmatically control our submit button. And we are going to assign a record field to our group box. We do not want to display this group box to the end user. Let me make it layout only. I will use select group option and I will select both group box and our button, and I'm going to create some space to insert a sub page that displays Fluid Attachment Framework. I will go ahead and insert the Oracle delivered sub page that will do the magic trick for us. I will click OK and drag our sub page to the center of our page. What you have to understand about this sub page is employee uses this sub page to upload his document from his mobile device. Just like everything else, let's put our subpage inside a group box. Again, I will select one more group box. Again, to programmatically manipulate this group box, let's give a name to our group box from one of our derived work record fields. Just like other group boxes on this page, let's make it layout only. Once we are done here, I'll click OK. I'll go ahead and save our page. This warning message will start popping up whenever you try to save our page. This is coming from Oracle delivered subpage that we just inserted. You can ignore this warning message. I will click OK. Now I'll go ahead and build our project to create tables from our record definition. I have built our transaction record. Let's open our page that we created and let's insert our page into our project. I'll go ahead and save our project. Now it's time to create a new component for our application. I'll click new component. I'll click OK. And let me drag our newly created page into our component. Let me change the item label. Now let me go ahead and update our search record for our component. Since ours is a self-service application, we do not want a search page. Hence, I will use a delivered view where a logic is written in the search init of this record to skip the search page. Since ours is a fluid application, let's navigate to Fluid tab and check Fluid mode. This ensures our application is responsive on all mobile devices. I will also check display on small form factor homepage because I want to add our application to our Fluid homepage. This will ensure our application tile will remain on all small form factor devices. And I will go ahead and click OK and save our component. Before we go ahead and register our component, let me show you where exactly I want to place our component. I will navigate to People Tools, Portal, Structure and Content. Since ours is a Fluid application, I will click on Fluid Structure and Content. All the Fluid pages will be under Fluid Pages. I will click on Fluid Pages. And I plan to include our application inside onboarding. I will go one step back to find the folder name for onboarding. I will click Edit. I will use this folder name when I do our component registration. For now, let me save it somewhere and I will use it later when I do component registration. Folks, now I am going to register our component. It is the same process that you follow for a classic component. In interest of time, I will fast forward the entire registration process. I'm going to create a new menu, attach our component to our menu, and complete the registration process. Since we have successfully completed the registration process, let's take a look at the shape of our page. Alright folks, I logged into PeopleSoft application. Now I will navigate to Employee Self-Service. Since ours is a fluid application, I can personalize our home page, add tile of our component here. I will click on Personalize Home Page. I will click on Add Tile. Since our application resides inside onboarding, I will select onboarding. This is our fluid application. Let me select it and let's save our home page. Let's go ahead and click on our tile. What? I know this looks like a mess. Let's take one step at a time and make it little better. First things first, please ignore the attachment portion of this page because everything will fall in place once we insert Oracle delivered pseudocode specific to this attachment framework. Let's focus on other fields. I'll start with submit button. I do not want submit button to be displayed after user selected driver's license or passport. It should be at the bottom of the page after attachment framework. Let's go ahead and fix that. I will navigate back to our app designer. Let me open our page. I will navigate to order tab. Something seems to be out of order here. In order our application to be fully responsive, the group box that came with the default layout should be the very first element on our page. It looks like fluid attachment subpage was misplaced. Let's drag it under group box 3. We have to drag it down. It should be under group box 3. Let me go ahead and save our page. If we refresh our page, as you can see, submit button is all the way at the bottom, just the way we want. Only thing is it is sticking with the attachment framework. Let's create some space around submit button. In order to create space around the submit button, I double clicked on the group box that we've wrapped around the submit button, and we are going to apply a CSS style that will create the space for us. Let's use 10 EM and see how it looks like. Let me save the change and we will refresh our page. Now it looks much better. Let's keep our changes. We do not need folder tab for our application because we already have page title here. Let's go ahead and remove it. In order to remove folder tab, all we have to do is open our component properties and select display folder tabs. Let me deselect both of these flags. Let's go ahead and save our changes. And if we refresh our page, now folder tab is gone. Let's add some instructions to our end user. I went offline and created a new message catalog entry which we will populate as instructions to our end user. We are going to pass employee name as bind parameter for this message. I opened page activate people code. This is where we write the logic to populate instructions to our end user. This is the field we assign to our long edit box. I will drag the field into our editor. We are going to populate this value from message catalog entry. Here we go. This is the logic that will populate our long edit box with the instructional text from message catalog entry. We are also passing the employee name as a bind value to our message catalog entry. I will go ahead and save our changes. If we refresh our page, the text will look something like this. Little crappy. Let's go ahead and fix this issue. To fix the issue, here I am at long edit box properties. There is a property called expand field when display only. If you remember, we have set long edit box as display only. We have to check this flag in order to unwrap our text on our page. Let's select this flag and save our changes. If we refresh our application, now it looks much better. If you want to create some space between the instructional text and the selection criteria, we can do that using a CSS style. Let's do it. I will double click on the group box for our selection criteria. I will navigate to Fluid tab and add a CSS style to create that space. Let's go ahead and save our changes. If we refresh our page, and it looks much better now. Now let's add save functionality to our submit button. In order to do that, I will navigate to component record field people code. Here I am at the field change event. I will use the function do save to save user changes. Now I will go ahead and save our changes and insert the current definition into our project. Folks, we are done halfway through. We can take a break from backend configuration and we will switch gears and work on some front-end configuration, and we will come back here once we are done with online configuration. In order to complete the front-end configuration, I will navigate to Setup HCM, Common Definitions, Attachments. These are the 5 configuration pages that we have to complete before we can use our fluid attachment framework. Let's start with define authorization. I'll click on it. Just like how we use permission lists to grant security for our PeopleSoft pages, we define these authorization IDs to grant security for our attachments. Now let's take a look at existing authorization IDs. In order to do that, I will click on the search button. If you take a look at this authorization ID, this is the authorization ID that was created to edit attachments. Let's open this. Here you can see we have enabled the access to edit attachments by checking this flag. Likewise, users can view attachments by checking this flag. In the next step, we are going to tie this authorization ID to a specific PeopleSoft role so that people having this specific role can edit or view attachments. I hope you got my point. If you take a look at this authorization ID, using this authorization ID, a user can only view attachments. They cannot delete attachments. Since these are the only two authorization IDs we need, instead of creating a new authorization ID, let's leverage these two authorization IDs. Like I said before, I'm going to associate one of the authorization IDs that I showed you before to a PeopleSoft role so that people having that role will have the specific access that we configured on this page. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's navigate to the same folder. By the way, I forgot to mention all the configuration steps are done in a sequential order. First, we completed define authorization. Now we will move on to the second step, define authorization entries. I'll click on it. Let's go ahead and create a new authorization entry. I will click on add a new value. Let's give a name to our authorization ID, something related to our transaction. I will click on add button. Let's quickly change effective date to 2020 and give some description. Since this authorization entry is for attachments, I will select attachments. Next, we should have a role name that we plan to associate with authorization ID that we created in the step number 1. What I did was I went offline and created a brand new role for this demo and associated a new permission list. Let's open the new permission list that I created. I will navigate to the Pages tab. I gave access to the Fluid transaction page that we all created earlier in this episode through this permission list. That's all I am doing here. Let's associate our new PeopleSoft role to the authorization ID. Keep in mind, this specific role accomplishes two tasks. Number 1, it gives access to the Fluid transaction page. Number 2, it will allow the employee to upload or edit attachments. Because now I'm going to assign a authorization ID that allows to both edit and view attachments. Let me do that. Let me complete selecting our role name, and this is the authorization ID that allows user to both edit and view attachments. In the next step, we are going to define our transaction attachment. Then we are going to link our transaction attachment to our specific entry ID. Guys, it looks like this configuration is all about mappings. I will click on define attachments. I will click on add a new value, and let's give a name to our attachment configuration, something related to our transaction. Let's assign some old date to our transaction. I will give some description. Attachment type should be document definition, which means you are allowing the users to create their own attachments, just like in our case, uploading their own address proof. If you select attachment, it is some kind of attachment that is common and you want to share with all employees. Just like how we discussed before, let's go ahead and associate the entry ID that we created in the previous step to our attachment configuration. I'll go ahead and save our attachment configuration. In our next configuration step, which is configure keys, we will define where to store our user attachments and how to uniquely identify them. Let's go ahead and click on it. Let's add a new row on this page and provide the application name where our attachment framework will be used. I will select HR core objects. Let's also add sub application ID just in case if you want to use the same attachment framework but use it differently for a different sub application ID. Keep in mind, we are going to pull the attachment configuration that we define here using these details in people code. Now let's add some description. Next, I will click on context keys. Here we can specify how we can partition our transaction specific attachments. As you know, we have both passport related attachments as well as driver's license. Later, we can use this criteria to filter the data. Now I will select our transaction record and the prompt field as address proof type. I will click OK. Now we are going to specify where we are going to store our attachments by clicking on store keys. What I did was I went offline and created a brand new record to store all our transaction specific attachments. Make sure you include the sub record that I showed here in order to leverage Fluid Attachment Framework. The other field I inserted was empl ID, which should be key because we should have a key field to uniquely identify our attachments. Let's tell our configuration to store all our user attachments in this record. I am back to the configuration page. Now I will select the custom record we just created for our purpose. Once I tab out, key fields are automatically populated. Let me select the field label and let's keep the default settings. I'll click OK. I will go ahead and save our configuration page. We just have one more page to configure. It is maintain definitions. Let's go ahead and click on maintain definitions. Let's search using the product ID that we configured for our transaction, which is HCR, and the sub application ID we used was HRAP. Let's change the effective date to 2020. Here we can assign multiple configuration IDs to our sub application ID. The order in which configuration data is pulled is based on the sequence number. We just have one configuration for our attachment framework. Let's go ahead and configure it. And let's give a sequence number 10. In our case, context key value is address proof type, which can be either passport or driver's license. Since we want to allow users to upload address proof either using passport or DL, I will select all values. If you want to restrict users just to passport, this is where you select that specific key value. Now I will assign our attachment configuration ID that we created before here. It doesn't matter because we have just one configuration. I will use 10 as the sequence number. Alright folks, I will go ahead and save our changes. We just completed online configuration for our Fluid Attachment Framework. Using people code, now I'm going to tie the online configuration that we have done so far to our transaction page. I'll open my page activate people code. Let me paste the code to import the application classes provided by Oracle to implement our Fluid Attachment Framework. Let me paste the code to declare variables. Basically, I am pasting the pseudo code provided by Oracle to implement our attachment functionality. Let me paste the main logic to implement our attachment functionality. Here we have to pass the context keys. We have defined one context key in our online configuration, which is address proof type. If we just want to allow users to upload attachments only in case of passport, that's when we pass the translate value of passport here. But in our case, we will accept all values, so I am passing blank here. Next, we have to pass store keys. In our case, it is empl ID. So I am passing the employee ID of the person who logged in. And finally, here for this constructor method, we have to pass the application ID. If you remember, we specified this as HCR in our online configuration. Here we have to pass our sub application ID that we specified in our online configuration. And finally, we need to provide the attachment configuration ID, which is SKADDR underscore proof. Just to summarize, this is the pseudocode used to invoke our online configuration and implement our attachment functionality. I will go ahead and save our changes. Once user uploads the attachment, there is a piece of code that we need to write specifically for attachment functionality at component save post change. This is the piece of code delivered by Oracle to save the attachments uploaded by user. I'll go ahead and save our piece of code here. Since ours is a fluid application, while we're here, let's navigate to post build and invoke the function set viewport. Let me paste the code, and this is the function that displays content based on the device that user logged in. Let me save our changes. Let's quickly navigate back to save post change event. I want to add a confirmation message here. Basically, a message will be displayed to the end user after he submits his attachment saying your address proof was successfully uploaded in the system. Here is the logic. Once again, this is a delivered people code function. Also, let's change the instructional text on our page once user have successfully uploaded the document. Also, let's hide all the group boxes once user submitted the documentation. Also, let's ensure if group box is hidden, all the fields inside the group box should be hidden. Let's do the same to all group boxes. After saving the changes, if you try to access our application, it should work the same way I demoed you in the beginning of this episode.